The Depth of Time by ShayaLonnie, Chapter 7, Terrible Watchdog. September 4th, 1997. Harry, Ron, and Hermione successfully broke into the Ministry after Mundungus arrived at Grimmauld Place, dragged there against his will by a vengeful house elf, under direct orders from Hermione. Dung told them all about how he had lost the locket and then pointed out the picture of its new owner in the Daily Prophet, Dolores Umbridge. Sirius overheard Hermione and Ron talk about the scars on Harry's hand, and it took him very little effort to figure out that Umbridge had harmed his godson permanently. Coupled with the fact that she had been behind a number of terrible things at Hogwarts, the stupid anti-werewolf legislation, and now the ridiculous Muggleborn Registration Act, Sirius wanted to go after her himself. It took both Harry and Hermione pleading with him, in addition to threats of petrifying him and leaving him alone with only Kreacher as company, for him to back down. Completely contrary to their plan, Sirius followed the trio to the Ministry of Magic. He lingered across the street in his animagus form while they infiltrated the institution under the influence of Polyjuice Potion. It took him less than an hour to arrive outside the entrance, a large bathroom where men and women lined outside the stalls. Padfoot paraded around as a lost dog as he waited impatiently for the trio to return. Every once in a while, someone stopped and patted him on the head, something that made him roll his eyes. He wanted to growl and bite, but knew it would cause more attention than being docile, so he held back and gritted his teeth as old ladies ran their sweaty hands over the top of his head while calling him a good little doggy. At one point, someone glanced at him and screamed, "Grim!" before running the other way, giving Sirius a good chuckle in the process. After what felt like an eternity, Ron, Harry, and Hermione finally exited the Ministry in a great haste. Sirius immediately caught sight of the Death Eaters on their tail. He shifted to his human form and grasped Harry's hand as Harry took hold of Hermione, who gripped tightly to Ron. It was dangerous and stupid, but they had little choice in the matter as Yaxley reached for Hermione. Mid this operation, Hermione managed to shake off the Death Eater, but only after he had seen the entrance to Grimmauld Place. Side-along apparition with another person was risky. Taking 2 people was ill-advised. 3 was suicidal. Hermione landed them in the forest where the Quidditch World Cup had been held, as Ron hastily explained to Sirius, and the men all fell to the ground, wincing as air pushed its way back into their lungs. Harry and Ron were on their knees, bleary-eyed and dizzy. Sirius, too, had a hard time regaining his senses, but the first that came back was his sense of smell. He breathed in a faint coppery odor and knew immediately that someone had been splinched. His eyes swiveled as he followed the scent, only to discover it was Hermione that was gravely injured. Sirius cradled her blood-covered form to him in order to retrieve her small beaded bag, and then he began rummaging through it. He threw the contents of the bag across the ground until he found a bottle of Detony she had used a month earlier to Remus in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. Sirius heard Harry gasp, watching as he pieced Hermione's back and shoulder together. A long cut slashed along her right arm, wound across the back of her shoulder blade and down beneath her blouse. He tore the garment away, revealing nothing but severed skin. He applied the Detony carefully, using his wand to close the wounds as quickly as possible. "There's a tent. Get it up," he ordered brusquely, with a cold tone that told both Harry and Ron he wasn't going to stand for any hesitation. While the tent was being pitched, Sirius moved around the boys, constantly attending to Hermione's small, unconscious form, never looking either of them in the eye. The boys in turn did the same. Sirius was angry. Somewhere along the line, they had gone and buggered it all up, and now Hermione was suffering. Each wizard took his fair share of blame silently, though Ron and Harry were more comfortable talking with one another about it. Once Hermione was safely inside the tent, on a bed that Sirius enlarged, He put open a small black Medi-Witch kit and began pouring pain relief potion and blood replenishing potion down her throat. By the time Harry and Ron dared to enter the tent, Sirius was already in his animagus form at the foot of Hermione's bed, standing guard over her sleeping form. And there he remained. Quietly, the two boys discussed the Horcruxes while they waited for Hermione to wake up for Sirius to change back. When it became obvious that they should each take a turn wearing the locket, Sirius stepped off the bed and inclined his head toward Harry, silently requesting the locket be placed on him. And so the days went on. Sirius kept vigil over Hermione's recovery, shifting into human form only when changing her bandages, feeding her potions, or waking her enough to give her the opportunity to eat, though they had little food available. On those occasions, he said as little as possible, refusing to meet her eyes, though she pleaded with him to look at her. Unable to let her see him break, Sirius retreated into his animagus form, knowing that it was near impossible for her to read the expression on his face that way. The locket unfortunately made everything worse. Sirius wore it at night and would dream of Azkaban and the Dementors. He saw visions of James and Lily dying, of Peter's ugly twisted sneer, and of a girl he loved vanishing into nothingness, leaving him alone in the world. He was grateful to be rid of the bloody thing each morning, but he observed with frustrated intensity as the Horcrux infected the other two wizards. Harry withdrew into himself, and Sirius kept a watchful eye, often removing the locket early if he noticed Harry being weighed down by it too quickly. Ron complained constantly, though a warning growl from Padfoot shut him up instantly. Despite her attempts, Sirius insisted that the piece of Voldemort's soul not touch any part of Hermione at any time. September 7th, 1997. We need to leave soon, Harry. I know. You think she's well enough to operate, though? Sirius could hear the boys whispering outside the tent where they were supposed to be standing guard. Only one needed to keep watch at a time, but it was obvious to everyone that Ron wanted away from the tension inside. How the bloody hell should I know? Can't get anywhere near enough to see. Not when he's wearing that thing. The tent door flapped in the breeze, and Sirius caught a glimpse of the boys standing there, huddled together as though perfectly unaware that he could hear every word. You go in and see if you can figure it out, Ron suggested. Get some sleep after. Harry must have agreed because he was inside a moment later. Sirius watched as he flicked his wand, igniting a few lamps in the corner of the room to light up the dark space. Attention turned to a large bed in one of the corners. Harry slowly approached, hands up to show that he was not a threat. Padfoot eyed him balefully as he stepped closer, watching as Harry's eyes darted to the locket hanging around his furry neck. Sirius? Harry asked quietly. It'd be really nice if I could talk to you. I need to know how Hermione is. He gestured to the body of the girl sleeping behind him. Her small frame was tucked carefully beneath the blankets, but the bandage over her back was still visible when Padfoot craned his neck to glance at her. Sirius knew that Harry blamed himself, of course, though each of the wizards took their turn carrying the weight of the guilt. Padfoot lowered his head, allowing Harry to remove the Horcrux. The moment it was gone, he let out a quick breath and shifted back into his human form, rubbing the sore muscle in his neck. Is it me, or is that thing getting heavier? You're right, Harry asked quietly. Sirius glanced at Hermione's sleeping form and sighed. Better today. You going to tell me what's going on yet? Sirius shook his head, knowing exactly what Harry was referring to. After such an incident, it was more likely for Sirius to have been worried about his godson, even if Hermione had been hurt, but it was obvious in the way that Sirius refused to leave her side that he was keeping secrets. Not my place. Just, she saved me, and I almost let her. We, Harry corrected. This is on all of us, not just you. It's my job to take care of you lot, Sirius tried to explain. It's my job to save the world, Harry shrugged his shoulders. She's in the world, therefore it's my job. You can't take my job, Sirius. You're not the chosen one, I am. Sirius rolled his eyes and huffed out a weak chuckle. Oh, stop with the bloody chosen one nonsense. Can she travel? Harry asked, ignoring him. You know we can't stay in one place for very long. We've already been here for days. You still having visions? Sirius inquired, noticing the exhausted look in Harry's eyes. Harry shifted his gaze away as he sighed, nodding. I want to stop, but none of us is in any shape to practice occlumency right now. It would only make us weaker, he admitted sadly. He's searching for a wand, and he's kidnapping Ollivander and killing Gregorovitch. Might be the death stick, Sirius suggested. What's that? From behind them, Hermione mumbled, It's just a myth. Go back to sleep, love, Sirius instructed. She ignored him, rolling up to face Harry. It's a myth about an unbeatable wand. There's a story about it in the book Dumbledore gave me. That thing's all in runes. When did you have the chance to translate it? Sirius asked her with a raised brow. I've been sitting here doing nothing for days, Hermione shrugged, wincing in pain as her shoulder protested the movement. Sirius cocked an eyebrow at her. You're supposed to be resting. And you are a terrible watchdog. You constantly fall asleep. When you do that, I read. Reaching for the book that she kept beneath her pillow, Hermione brushed off Sirius's hand when he tried to help her get comfortable. In the story, it talks about 3 brothers who were able to evade death as though death were a real person. Death offers them each a gift. One brother asks for a wand powerful enough to defeat any wizard. I assume that this is the same fairy tale wand that's known as the Death Stick or the Wand of Destiny. Professor Binns mentioned it a few times in History of Magic, she said, frowning down at the book in her hands. So, do you think it's real? Harry asked. Sirius shrugged. Maybe. Of course not, Hermione said at the same time. Sirius, it's ridiculous to even think that something like that could exist. Oh yeah? Tell Harry what the other 2 brothers asked for in the story. He gestured as if allowing her to take the stage. Hermione glared at him. Fine. The second brother received a stone that could bring back the dead. The third brother asked for a cloak of invisibility. So, a cloak of invisibility, but not just any cloak. A cloak that could never lose its charm, never break or tears, and is impervious to jinxes and hexes. Sirius grinned smugly, as though he had already won the argument. He tapped his index finger against his bottom lip, ignoring the dark look that Hermione was directing at him. I wonder where we could find such an object. Even if the cloak exists, the other 2 are preposterous, she protested. Yes, it's preposterous to think that people could come back from the death, Harry said sarcastically and turned to Sirius for backup. Sirius tipped his head solemnly. He figured that his expression would have appeared almost genuine if not for the glint of mischief he knew was in his eye. Harry, Horcruxes, Hermione admonished when he chuckled in amusement. What we need to be concerned with is how to find a way to destroy the locket and then find the others. She reached for her bag. Now, I've been researching. Sirius growled. When the hell have you been resting? When Ron's in here, she answered as she eyed Sirius and Harry. You 2 won't leave me alone. Now there's only 2 known ways to destroy a Horcrux, Basilisk Venom and Fiendfire. Do you know how to cast Fiendfire, Sirius? Harry asked. Cast? Yes, Sirius confirmed. Control it? Well, it's complicated. It's a last resort kind of option. If it needs to happen, I can do it. But we're talking about apparating to a deserted island, placing the Horcruxes on the island, casting the fire, and then getting the hell out before it consumes us with it. Might even want to learn a spell that can sink an island. Last resort, got it. I'm going to go and tell Ron that we'll be able to move today. Harry smiled at Hermione. It's good to see you looking yourself again. October 17th, 1997. I thought you knew what you were doing, Ron shouted at Harry as Sirius entered the tent. I thought Dumbledore had told you what to do. I thought you had a real plan. Sirius turned a dour gaze on the teen for daring to raise his voice to his godson, but he was not one, these days, to jump into a fight without proper provocation. He looked to Harry and Hermione for an explanation. Did I miss something important? We think we found a way to destroy the Horcruxes, Hermione said. Harry used the sword of Gryffindor to kill the basilisks our second year, and the sword is goblin-made, and therefore only takes in that which strengthens it. Sirius finished her sentence. Bloody hell, that's inspired. He laughed and scratched his chin and thought. So what now? Nothing now, Ron glared daggers at the rest of them, because the bloody thing's been stolen from Hogwarts, so even if we were able to sneak back into the castle, which we can't because it's being run by bloody Death Eaters, it's not even there for us to take. Sirius growled at him, not liking his attitude one bit, nor the way he was staring at Harry and Hermione. Watch the tone there, boy. It's because of the locket, Hermione said, frowning. Ron, take it off. You wouldn't be talking like this if you hadn't been wearing it all day. Harry glowered at Ron. Yeah, he wouldn't. He's been doing nothing but complaining this whole time. He's starving, as if the rest of us aren't. You complain more than any of us, and Hermione got splinched and almost died. Ron narrowed his eyes. Piss off, Potter. Why are you even still here? Harry asked Ron. The redhead threw his wand up. Search me. Go home then, Harry snapped. Yeah, maybe I will. Ron shouted and took several steps towards Harry, who did not back away. Ron, take off the locket, Hermione begged. Sirius's fingers twitched around his wand, watching and listening, desperate to put an end to the boy's childish outburst, even if he only used the silencing charm. However, Hermione and Harry stood between him and Ron, and the boy's temper was unpredictable, especially with a Horcrux hanging around his neck. Sirius felt that Hermione was right, but that did nothing to mollify the nervous anger he felt when the redhead glared at both of his friends with such malice. Harry stared icily at Ron, both boys ignoring Hermione's pleas for peace. Just go home to your family and let your mom make you a big dinner and wipe your face for you. That's what you want anyways. Ron bellowed back at Harry. What I want is to make sure my family's alive. It's all right for you, isn't it, with your parents safely out of the way? Oh, Hermione groaned. Before she could act, Sirius grasped Ron's collar and lifted him high into the air. Sirius felt his countenance turn dark, reminiscent of his first meeting with the redhead in the Shrieking Shack, as he stared grimly at Ron. Too far, he said, with a frightening amount of control in his voice. Sirius, Hermione pleaded, put him down. Harry glared at Ron. Yeah, put him down so he can leave. Fine. Sirius slowly lowered Ron's shaking form back to solid ground, holding his stare the entire time, not letting go of the boy's collar. He used his other hand to tear the locket from Ron's neck and then released him with a shove for good measure. You ever speak to either of them like that again, boy, I'll transfigure what's left of you so no one will ever know where to look. He threatened, his tone low and menacing. Ron, impulsive as usual, responded by drawing his wand. Sirius was much faster, of course, but before either could get a spell off their lips, a shield erupted between them. It expanded across the tent, separating Ron from the other three, visibly showing how the ties of friendship had been severed. Glancing to the side, Sirius saw Hermione concentrating on the shield with her wand drawn. You're really staying here, Hermione? Ron asked, and then cast his eyes playfully at Sirius. Who am I kidding? Of course you're staying here. We promised, Harry, Hermione cried, her wand still up, holding the weight of the shield. Bullshit, Hermione, Ron scowled at her. You're not here for Harry, you're here for him, he said, pointing his wand at Sirius, who only growled in response. Whatever you did to bring him back changed you. He should have stayed dead. Just as when Ron had brought up Harry's parents, causing Sirius to snap, Hermione apparently had her own line to never cross. Sirius was not remotely surprised when she yelled, "Get out!" and pushed her shield toward Ron, forcing him magically toward the tent flap. You don't belong here. Go away. Grow up. And when this war is over and you finally matured a bit, come and apologize to us. But we are done here. Damn right I am. Ron glared at her and then left. Silence filled the tent as though Ron had taken all the noise with him. Hermione looked up when Harry sniffed and wiped the sleeve of his shirt across his face. Sirius clenched and unclenched his fists as he slowly calmed down. Harry eventually took a breath, running a hand through his messy black hair in frustration. He reached for the Horcrux. I'll take the first watch. Sirius placed a hand on his godson's shoulder. You sure? Yeah, I need time to think anyway. You two get some rest. Harry gave Hermione a small smile, and she returned it briefly as he left the tent. When her gaze connected with Sirius's, Hermione broke away immediately. An hour later, when she could not stop thinking long enough to rest, Hermione sat up and sighed. She looked at Sirius and frowned when she caught him staring at her, bringing an uncomfortable warmth to her face. She felt like she had been caught doing something wrong. Walking to the tent door, she peered outside to find Harry leaning up against the trunk of a tree, staring intently down at his wand, as though it would tell him what they should do next. You ever think maybe he's right? Sirius asked. Don't. Hermione shook her head as she made her way back toward the bed. The same bed that she had been unthinkingly sharing with Sirius since she had been splinched, though never in his human form. Somehow she had overlooked the fact that the dog was still in fact a fully grown wizard. She would snuggle beneath the covers and he would crawl beside her, turning once in a circle before tucking his snout against his front paws. Absent-mindedly, Hermione would reach over and stroke his fur as though he were some old beloved family pet and not Harry's godfather, a man who she had used blood magic to bring back to life, thus tying herself to him forever through ancient magic. But here, now, with him standing in front of her, his gray eyes trained on her face, Hermione shivered under the intensity of his gaze. Maybe I should have stayed. Don't, Hermione snapped at him. The locket made him say those things. If you weren't here, would have found something else to yell about. Don't you dare say that you should have stayed dead. He's not entirely wrong, Sirius reasoned calmly as he approached her. You're not just here for Harry. He closed the distance between them until he was inches away from her, the heat from their bodies colliding. Neither am I, he admitted, his voice husky as he spoke. That voice did things to her that she was not ready to acknowledge, at least not aloud. Don't do this, Sirius, she pleaded, glancing up at him, and then instantly back down, unable to hold her own against his stare. Sirius, however, forced the issue by placing a finger beneath her chin and lifted her face to meet his. Hermione closed her eyes to avoid looking up at him, tears trickling out of the corners. Can't avoid it forever, kitten. The boy was right about one thing. Whatever you did to bring me back changed something, he said softly, running the pad of his thumb against the line of her jaw. You're not the only one who's good at magic, Hermione. He leaned in, pressing his stubble-covered cheek against her smooth one, brushing his lips against her ear. Hermione's breath hitched in her throat at the contact. "I know the life-death ritual," he whispered before pulling away. Her eyes shot open wide. You know? You knew this whole time? About the bond?" Sirius inclined his head in affirmation. "It's not dark magic, but what you did was blood magic, which in some families means the same thing. The House of Black is no exception." He sat down in the large armchair, facing her bed, kicking his foot up to rest on the opposite knee. "We eventually have to talk about it." Hermione looked away from him. "I don't even know what it means." "By the end of the war, we'll have a lot talking to do. Let's make a date of it, shall we?" Sirius grinned at her, and she turned her attention back to him with narrowed eyes. "Your birthday," he suggested easily, as if the weight of the world no longer rested on her shoulders. "My birthday? Why my birthday?" "Fine, the day after your birthday," he said with a smirk. "Gives us almost a year to finish this war, and if we're lucky, a little recovery time after what might go down in wizarding history as the night everyone was smashed." Hermione frowned. "Or mourn." "No," Sirius shook his head. "I'm done mourning. Had too much grief in my life, and I'll spend the rest of this war making sure I never have to mourn again." He vowed, his tone once again firm and fierce. The sound of it made Hermione shiver and blush. Sirius took immediate notice and chuckled, causing Hermione to avert her gaze once more. He stood up and reached for his jacket. "One day you won't do that anymore." "Do what?" Hermione asked quietly as he made his way to the tent door. "Be embarrassed about how I make you feel," he clarified, fixing a serious gaze upon her. Hermione let out a shaking breath as he broke their stare and ducked out of the tent, jacket and pack of cigarettes in hand. "Do I want to know?" Harry asked as Sirius approached him from behind. A lit cigarette hung from Sirius's lips as he slipped his leather jacket on. He took the stick in hand and exhaled, letting the smoke drift off with the wind. "Nice charm," he commented, noticing how the rain poured around them, never touching the dry circle Harry created. Sirius smiled in reminiscence. "Your mom was always good at charms like this." "Avoiding the question, Padfoot," Harry countered, using Sirius's marauder's name in a tone of voice that made him sound exactly like James. Sirius laughed softly at the game, taking another drag from his cigarette. "I know what you're doing, you know. You figured me and Remus out easy. You figured out that when you want information, calling us Moony and Padfoot in that voice makes us think of your dad, which it does," he affirmed, "and when you want to impose your opinion, you make eye contact to remind us of Lily." Harry cocked his head to the side and folded his arms across his chest, an amused grin on his jaw. "I guess Mom had a way of being convincing?" "Your grandmother Doria would have loved you," Sirius let out a quiet laugh. "She and Carlos, your grandfather, almost made a game of hiding information when they wanted to. She'd always win. Drove your dad and me mental." Harry grew quiet for a moment, his focus far away until he brought his attention back to Sirius. The amused boy was gone once again, replaced by the burdened soldier of war. "I think I want to go to Godric's Hollow." There was a beat of silence as Sirius thought about it for a moment, knowing that Harry was likely to go on his own regardless of what anyone else said about the matter. Eventually, he sighed in resignation. Consider it done. And that's the end of Chapter 7.